Hey everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is SportsMoney reporter Justin Birnbaum. Justin, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, as you know, it is a great time to be an MLS team per your reporting. Since 2019, the average value of Major League Soccer clubs has risen 85% to $579 million. What is driving that growth?
I think ultimately it comes down to this major bet on the growth of soccer here in North America. For a long time, obviously the big four leagues, American football, basketball, hockey, and baseball have really driven the sports scene here. But we're now seeing a time where interest in soccer is growing. Major League Soccer, while not necessarily as accomplished or as big as other leagues in the world like the English Premier League, is still starting to capture the eyes and hearts of fans here. Their fan base is younger, it's more diverse, and as a result, there are a lot of wealthy people betting on the growth of soccer going forward. You know, we're seeing expansion fees constantly rising. We're seeing new teams be bought for more and more money. So that's really what's pushing things up here. And, you know, the way it seems like there's room to continue to grow as revenues continue to expand. And obviously they have the Apple deal, which is a bold gamble on their part, but also something that could drive a lot of revenue there going forward.
I do want to break down that Apple deal. By partnering with Apple, as you said, MLS has really taken that bold step towards streaming. What are the implications of that move?
Yeah, so the particulars of the deal are interesting. They're guaranteed 2.5 billion over 10 years, and that kind of averages out to around 250 million in media rights every year. They're paying production costs, so the total kind of net figure is a little lower, and maybe that's not as high as they had sought when they started to enter this process. But it really is kind of a new thing we're seeing, because while a lot of the other leagues have gotten involved with streaming, MLS has gone streaming first, and they're very much relying on this Apple partnership to really drive things going forward. The thing I didn't mention is that even though they're guaranteed a base amount of money, ultimately they can earn more on that with and kind of an undisclosed profit sharing, revenue sharing subscription threshold. It's unclear where they are to reach that, but ultimately partnering with Apple, who is one of the, if not the most powerful consumer tech companies in the world, is just, you know, a force that can really be reckoned with.
Definitely a bold partnership there. And you also just broke some pretty big news, and that's the Los Angeles Football Club is valued at $1 billion. That's a huge number, and it's the league's first billion-dollar franchise, which is more than double what Forbes valued the club back in 2019. So first, before we get into that, I do want to talk about breaking down like how you evaluate these clubs and determine how much they're worth.
Yeah, of course. I think it's all about kind of understanding the economics of these leagues and how they work, and kind of also derive an understanding of where they're going and how big these revenues can get. Ultimately, you know, the way we do that is we look at recent transaction data. We talk with a number of industry executives. You know, we talk to people in ownership. We talk to investment bankers, all kinds of insiders, and then we take this base understanding of the economics of the sport and use that to derive our estimates. So it's a pretty intensive process, but ultimately it allows us to kind of really put out what we feel are concrete numbers.
Great. And let's talk about LAFC specifically. What has driven their success?
So they're a really interesting case. Now, obviously, like you said, a billion is a huge number. And I don't think, you know, every franchise is capable of reaching that milestone at this point, but you're talking about a franchise that is operating in one of the most vital soccer markets in our country, and also a team that has really executed well in many different ways. This is a club that's only been around since 2014, where they were founded for a $110 million expansion fee, and they didn't even hit the field until 4 years later. So they did some interesting things, really built up a grassroots effort to kind of inform the community of who they were and kind of establish brand loyalty. They even sent a group of supporters to Germany to kind of see how other, you know, European clubs support their fans. But they also did, you know, anything an LA team would do, and that's kind of weave in this celebrity factor into their culture and also their environment. Some of it happened organically, where celebrities started showing up at games, but also even before they were playing games, they had celebrity members of their ownership group, like Will Ferrell, who bought in 2016. Since then, obviously, they've had incredible success on the field. They won the MLS Cup this year. You know, they've had some really, really standout players like Carlos Vela, who is arguably, you know, one of the best players to come through the team, if not the league. And also, they have like a really interesting, diversified revenue stream. They have very strong numbers in terms of revenue and, you know, the basics like ticketing, sponsorship, F&B. But ultimately, they have these billboards attached to the stadium that's revenue generating. They have an events business that they keep pushing and pushing forward since they control their stadium. They have a production business. They have a food hall. All these different things contribute and boost their revenue. And they just added a new naming rights partner as well for the stadium, which had been vacant since Bank of California paid to terminate its agreement. Now they're with BMO. So there's lots to like, a lot coming. They led the league in revenue based on our numbers this year, and that number is only set to grow.
If they led the league, I want to hear about other teams. Is anyone following their lead? Who do we need to keep our eye out?
Yeah, so I think the one that really comes to mind is New York City FC, and that's because they're owned by City Football Group, which is the organization that also owns Manchester City in the Premier League, one of the most valuable soccer clubs in the world, one of the most successful soccer clubs in the world. And that kind of ownership, kind of lends itself to being able to run a very well-run organization. I think what's interesting is that NYCFC has always played in Yankee Stadium up until now, and they recently announced that they're going to build and move to a stadium in Willets Point, Queens. It's going to be a soccer-specific stadium, and the one thing I've noticed is while New York City FC is not one of the better revenue-performing teams in the league, it's very important that these teams control their stadiums or play in soccer-specific stadiums because that allows them to create a different live experience, but also control their ability to generate revenue, whether it's, through ancillary businesses, as we mentioned with LAFC, whether it's ticketing, sponsorship. When you share a venue or play in a venue that's not yours, it's harder to do those things, but ultimately they're getting a really nice stadium in a really great part of the city, and that should really, help them improve going forward.
So aside from New York City FC, what are some other clubs that we really need to watch out for?
So I think Miami is an interesting case study as well, just because they're still relatively new to the league and they have a stadium situation that's evolving, and they'll have a new venue later on as well. But ultimately, Miami is just such a great soccer market and is also a great market in general. I think they're fun to watch. Other teams, more recent to the league, like Charlotte FC, Nashville Soccer Club, Austin FC, these are all, new expansion clubs, and they've proven that they can perform very early on, even in markets that aren't necessarily, the most flashy. I mean, Austin FC in 2 years has generated crazy amount of revenue for where they are. So I think those expansion success stories, and Charlotte too, Charlotte is owned by David Tepper, the billionaire owner of the Carolina Panthers, and they play in the Panthers Stadium, or I guess it's a shared stadium now. But, to be able to perform in a football stadium is really, really a strong sign. So these expansion clubs are really, really great success stories. It's showing that the league can really perform at a local level. Obviously, they need to get the national level going with the Apple rights deal. But I think it's also kind of interesting to look at some of the larger markets in the league who've lagged behind, whether it's Chicago or New England. And, for one reason or another, I think, these markets, have chances to tick up. Joe Mansueto really hasn't had that much time to control the Chicago Fire. The New England Revolution really need to get their own soccer-specific stadium, and that could really help them see some exponential growth. But I think more what we have here is kind of a sleeping giant situation where, if these smaller, less flashy markets are performing so well, that really indicates that these larger markets can be tapped into and perform well.
Sure, and I think that really speaks to a point that you made in our last conversation on the World Cup, which you mentioned that the overall talent in MLS has taken a step forward. And one piece of evidence was shown by the number of players participating in the World Cup. How has that contributed to the rising popularity of soccer in the U.S.?
I think that for MLS to really take the next level is to really raise the talent level of its league. Right now, obviously, there's the big 5 leagues in Europe where, most of the more talented players in the world end up. That's where a lot of soccer interest is concentrated. You've seen MLS come forward leaps and bounds. As you mentioned, they had the 6 most players of any league at the World Cup. I think that's really important because MLS doesn't just want to be a North American league. I think obviously having that concentration of your interest and fan here is important because we have so much commercial value here. But one of the things that the Apple deal really banks on is having kind of this global presence and this global interest. And when you think about having international stars in MLS, that opens up markets all around the world. And markets all around the world means more subscribers. So more subscribers will generate more revenue for them on the league level. So ultimately, I think they're going to continue to get better. It's really kind of a massive step forward where MLS is no longer kind of a place where people go to end their careers. You see young, great talent develop there as well. You see kind of, players move on to European clubs for high sums. And also it's become an important pipeline for American talent. I think while the main players we were following in the World Cup for Team USA are playing overseas, a lot of them, their origins stem back here. FC Dallas, for example, who is one of the lower valued teams in the league, has a reputation of having a great academy and really developing players. So I think that being able to develop these players, being able to raise the talent level of the league and move the needle forward is really going to change the way we see MLS in the coming years.
I do want to pivot to your most recent reporting, and you said that at least 19 billionaires or members of billionaire families have key ownership stakes in MLS franchises. Why are so many ultra-wealthy investors flocking to the league?
I think it's important to know that there are, several billionaires who've kind of believed in MLS from day one. And, Robert Kraft and Philip Anschutz, who respectively own the Revolution, the Galaxy, have been involved from day one. And I think ultimately it comes down to this belief in the potential of soccer here in North America. Obviously, sports assets have become really hot. You see with the Phoenix Suns or the Denver Broncos selling for record prices that people are willing to get in for tremendous amounts of money. Sports ultimately have been proven to be a recession-resistant asset. Some people can say recession-proof. Bennett Rosenthal, owner of LAFC, said to me that he likes to call it recession-resistant. And I think that's interesting because they tend not to necessarily correlate with the market. They tend to appreciate a ton over long periods of time. And it's basically kind of a safe place, I guess, to park your money, if we're going to simplify it here. So I think where MLS plays into that fact, is a number of reasons. For one, if you're going to go out and buy an NFL team, the prices are astronomically high, whereas for a significantly less amount of money, you can buy control of an MLS team at this point. Ultimately, people understand that there's a growth story to be told in MLS, and they're banking on that these franchises have room to run. Apple will bring them closer to that. The revenues will continue to grow up. One thing to note is the revenue multiples are still high compared to other sports. MLS tends to trade at levels relative to growth stocks, more than, the other existing Big Four professional leagues. And part of that is that we've seen, billionaires come in and, pay big money for these franchises. Real Salt Lake was sold to David Blitzer and Ryan Smith early in 2022. I'm almost forgetting we're in 2023 at this point.
I know.
So, the more people that come in and believe in this are really driving it up. It's a bet on the growth of the sport. It's more affordable than some of these other franchises. And, there's only a finite amount of MLS teams. There's still expansion to come. But like any sport, once you have these set amount of teams, you can either get into that or you can't be involved. So it's almost like an exclusive club.
So is an investment in MLS more exciting than, let's say, the NFL now because of this exponential growth factor that you're saying?
I think it's hard to predict what's going to grow faster. And I mean, obviously the NFL has much more mature and established revenues and, essentially controls the day of the week. I think it comes down to what the owner desires and what they're interested in. I think there are a lot of people who, have more of a global interest in soccer or football, as you call it, around the world. Has more of a global appeal, whereas American football is more concentrated here. I mean, ultimately, the NFL is a behemoth. These teams are some of the most valuable in the world. The Dallas Cowboys are worth $8 billion. So it's hard to even, compare MLS to NFL in that regard. The NFL's commercial and financial potential is strong. It continues to be strong. But ultimately, there are people who and MLS has shown us that soccer appeals to them more. But one interesting trend is there are a number of NFL owners who also own MLS teams. So I think that, there's a synergy there.
This whole conversation really has revolved around the potential of soccer in the United States. So I do want to take a step forward here, look into the future. What is next for MLS?
Yeah, so I think in the immediate future, obviously this is year one of the Apple deal. So this is going to be a very grand experiment about how things go and how much they'll be able to drive. It's a long deal. They're under terms for 10 years. So it's not necessarily, make or break, in the first month of a 10-year deal. But I think it'll be interesting to see how many people are able to navigate and gravitate to, a streaming first experience. Obviously, being able to watch it on your iPhone or any Apple product is a kind of a key thing, but ultimately people still gravitate to linear TV. It's just kind of the way sports fans are. MLS has the benefit of having younger fans who are maybe more digital native, but also, it's an experiment. It's a gamble. We're going to see how it plays out. I think also it's important to note that MLS is launching its 29th team this year, St. Louis Soccer Club. So they're going to start playing. And also they're going to add a 30th team. The deal is not closed, but a well-placed source has told us that the next price for the expansion team is going to be $500 million. It'll likely be Vegas or San Diego. So I think that's really interesting because $500 million is a really big step up from the last expansion price, which was $325 paid by David Tepper for Charlotte FC. So the fact that, it's gone from $325 to $500 and there are interested parties willing to pay that really shows that the growth is still coming and it's still being driven by these things.
Is any other team anywhere close to being valued at $1 billion?
So the Galaxy we value them at $925 million, and they're another one that they're arguably the most famous and the most, the first super team of MLS. They're one of the best success stories. They're owned by Philip Anschutz and Anschutz Entertainment Group, so that's more of a conglomerate type thing, and their revenues are growing too. So I think they're interesting. They're obviously not where LAFC is right now by our math, but to be a $900 million franchise is still pretty impressive.
Great. Justin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany.